live for episode 16 of the Daily Geeky Pastimes podcast. We're here every weekday morning at 9 a.m. UK time. We talk about gaming news, we talk about the latest kind of controversial topics, hot topics. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Expel's tweet that kind of went viral, talking about Call of Duty, talking about things that he thought Call of Duty needs, or Warzone needs in particular, and how some of the developers responded to that, and then how he responded to that. It's a whole thing. But I have thoughts on it. I think it's kind of interesting. We're also going to be talking about 4 or 5 kind of interesting games news stories. It's been a little bit of a quiet weekend, even though I was actually away for the last few days, so I didn't do a podcast Thursday, Friday. I was in Paris to go to Parc Asterix, an Asterix the Ghoul themed theme park. It was really good, like really fun. Had a good weekend there. But yeah, I thought, oh, there's going to be loads of gaming news to talk about. Actually, not so much. But if you want to listen to these recordings live, you can do so right here on YouTube, so youtube.com/Geeky Pastimes, or you can hear them just after the fact on your normal podcast services. So, like I said, this is episode 16, and the first news story that we're going to be talking about today is path ray tracing being added to Cyberpunk. This was something that I didn't see many sites like do a big deal about, other than obviously Digital Foundry and Eurogamer and things like that. Because this is kind of would have been a big deal, I think, a couple of years ago, you know, when Cyberpunk came out. But now people seem to care less about it, and I think that's for a variety of reasons. But basically, for anyone who doesn't know, obviously Cyberpunk was seen as like the big graphics powerhouse, you know, the big news of can your PC run Crysis? It was like kind of, can you run Cyberpunk? It was meant to be this game that looked absolutely insane, looked incredible, used all the latest technology, used all the latest features and everything like that. And then I think when it came out, it was maybe a little bit disappointing. Like, the game does look really good, especially the environments, like the city and the desert. It does look really, really cool. But, you know, there were lots of reasons why people were disappointed with that game, right? Whether it was because of the bugs, whether it was because of the writing, whether it was because of the RPG systems. I sort of didn't like hardly anything about that game other than how the city looked. But even like the graphics, I thought by the time it finally came out, because obviously it was delayed a lot, by the time it eventually came out, it maybe didn't look as good as it had done, you know, when we'd seen glimpses of it a long time before. And that's always going to be the curse of any game that gets delayed for a very long time, is that there's going to be like, when you do the first trailer, it's going to be like cutting edge. And then if the game gets delayed by like a year or more, it's no longer cutting edge. Like, by the time it comes out, other things have come along, especially smaller games maybe that use kind of more modern, you know, graphics features, whether it's a new engine, whether it's some new thing that a graphics card can do or whatever. Because those games took less time to make, they kind of overtake it. So by the time Cyberpunk came out, it didn't look that impressive. And one of the big things that people were talking about with it, and one of the big things that Nvidia got behind Cyberpunk with, was ray tracing, RTX, Nvidia calls it. And, you know, people who don't know, ray tracing is basically when you look at, you know, real life and you can see things, what's happening is light is bouncing off a light source, whether that's the sun or artificial light or whatever, and then it will bounce off objects, and then it will eventually get to your eye. And sometimes it will bounce off lots of objects. And the lights, you know, will start off as probably a white light, but then as it bounces over objects, it, you know, might sort of shift a little bit. Some of it might get absorbed by the objects and the rest of it gets reflected. So, you know, if you have lots of white light bouncing off a big bright orange surface, the light that's bouncing off that orange surface will be orange lights now, and then that can affect other surfaces and things like that. And that kind of can lead to obvious things like reflections in mirrors, but also just more subtle things. Like, you know, an area that's only kind of lit by indirect light, having a kind of coloured tint and stuff like that. Now, games for a long while have had lots of ways of cheating that, of kind of making something look fairly convincing, but it was pre-baked. So that basically means when the game designer created the level, they did a pass where a computer worked out all of those light bounces, and they do it in like reverse, I think. So they do it from the camera, and then they draw a line, you know, sort of like, okay, so then it's bouncing off this object, and then it keeps on doing like more and more lines bouncing off objects until it hits a light source, and then it works out the path. And it works out what all of the colors should be, it works out the brightness, all of that kind of stuff. But all of that is like quite computationally complicated, I guess, or at least expensive. And that means that when they're doing pre-baked lighting, they can afford to sort of light a scene and it take like hours for the lighting to be worked out. but then they'll bake it in. So now all of those textures, all of the different surfaces, all of the different materials have that really complex lighting built into them, and it looks really good. Like when you're moving around the environment, the lighting looks kind of like it should. The problem with it is it's not dynamic. It doesn't like really affect it if like, you know, there's an explosion nearby or if a light turns on or off or something like that. So lots of games that have incredible looking lighting in the environment are very, very static, you know, like nothing really moves. And then there's other tricks that they've done over time to sort of like work out how to do, okay, you can do dynamic objects, especially for reflections and things like that. But normally what happens is the reflections and any kind of dynamic lighting and stuff like that might only affect it if the actual source of the light is on the screen, because games are obviously constantly trying to be as efficient as possible. So if you're in a game and you're looking in one direction, everything that is behind your character and to the sides of your character isn't being rendered. It isn't being like considered for the sake of like graphics and lighting and stuff like that. It's being occluded because it's kind of, okay, well, you're like you don't need that. You can't see it, so why does it matter? But that can make things like reflections and stuff a little bit funky. So, you know, you can be looking in a mirror in a game, and some stuff that should be reflected or shiny surface, some stuff that should be reflected isn't, because as far as the game's concerned, it doesn't really exist. And, you know, that's kind of always been the trade-off for making reflections that look pretty good and aren't too expensive on the computer. There's just sort of like weird glitches. And most people, I would say, don't really care. Like, you know, I'm hardly ever playing a game and then looking at the surface of the water and being like, but there's a bright sign behind me. Why isn't that being reflected? Like, that doesn't really cross my mind. But there's a lot to be said for, you know, things that maybe you don't notice, but are like, you know, your subconscious picks up on, that it makes something look more realistic or more natural or something like that. So ray tracing was kindly answer to that. It's, you know, technology that Nvidia's had on their GPUs since like the 20 series card, so 2 generations of cards now. And I think AMD have their own thing now as well. They've started doing it. And basically, like I said, it does something where it's like drawing lines from your camera onto objects and then onto something else. And it will do however many bounces. You know, if you've got ray tracing set to the lowest quality, maybe it only does one bounce to check, hey, if you draw a line from the camera to that thing, that pixel, and then draw another line from there reflecting it, is that a light source? Like, do we need to render that? Or if you have it like turned up to full, maybe it'd be like 16 bounces. I don't know what the numbers are. A lot. But that basically, you know, kind of tricks it into thinking like what is going to happen, like trying to find those light sources, find a way that color would realistically reflect around and how that works. But that's still very, very difficult. Even with the fancy graphics cards, that's still very difficult. So that's like path ray tracing. And a lot of games only use other types of ray tracing. So like Call of Duty only does ray tracing for shadows. It doesn't worry about the color of light or anything like that. It just worries about like, okay, like, is there a line from this pixel, from this object to a source of light, or is something in the way? And that can make shadows a little bit more interesting. So like Black Ops Cold War and stuff like that has ray trace shadows. Some games only do it for shiny surfaces. So you can get games where it's only if it's like a reflective surface, like a mirror or a piece of metal or something like that. And everything else, they don't really worry about it too much. But like anything shiny, they can do ray trace reflections, and then that makes it look kind of cool. So like Watch Dogs Legion, I think, is like that. And, you know, you can get some really cool effects with that. But having full pathed ray tracing is like the holy grail of it. And people have done experiments before where there was a version of Minecraft that released with it. There was a version of Quake 2 that released with it. And these are games that are obviously really old, so a lot easier for computers to run. And when they add that layer of ray tracing on top of everything else, then it looks, you know, really, really cool, because you have lighting effects. It looks so natural. When you have an explosion or something like that, it casts interesting shadows that are like colors and have soft edges, and you have light bouncing around in realistic ways. So like proper dark corners, like in real life, if you think of your room right now and you look around, you can probably see there's some bits like down the side of a wardrobe or in a corner of a shelf or something that's properly dark and there's no light getting there. That's, you know, fairly rare if there's any light in a room. So they're more interesting. They stand out a little bit more. And that sort of thing happens with full path ray tracing. So anyway, long explanation, very, very long. But basically Cyberpunk, this game that maybe people didn't care about so much for various reasons, has added a thing on PC that they can do full ray tracing, like, well, path ray tracing. And, you know, they've put it out there knowing that most people don't have computers that can run it. You know, to run it anything sensible, you probably need like DLSS on and have a 4090 and all of this complicated stuff. And Digital Foundry did a really good video where they're like, okay, we can show what it looks like if it's, high resolution, running at 60 frames a second with the highest quality ray tracing on. And to my eyes, at least, it doesn't really look any different. And like, I looked in the YouTube comments and there's loads of people being like, this is amazing, this is the future, like, this is what games are going to look like in 10 years. And to me, it's just like, I could be getting a really high frame rate and normal resolution with normal hardware, or I could be spending, literally like 4 times as much on a computer, or like having a frame rate that is like half of what it should be, or a resolution that's half what it should be, or all of these extra things to make something that, to me at least, looks slightly better. Like very slightly better. Occasionally you notice something if you're really looking for it in a very static environment, in a environment where you're not thinking about gameplay, you're not thinking about running and shooting and stuff like that. You're looking at something. Sometimes you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, that looks a little bit better. Like they'll zoom in on like a shop, some shelves in a shop, and I'll be like, hey, can you see that vase is slightly red because there's a red light over to the side and that's kind of reflecting off it. And when you look at it really closely, you're like, oh yeah, it is kind of red. And it's like, I don't think it looks any better than the one before where they're using all of the clever tricks to make stuff look good. And actually, in the Digital Foundry video, they talk about it in a way that I think is pretty interesting, where they talked about the fact that they some faces and things like that, particularly in dialogue scenes, actually look worse with all of the ray tracing on. And the reason for that is because when they have the sort of all of the tricks to do lighting, they don't need to make the lighting work. Like, they don't need to make the lighting realistic. Instead, they can just make the lighting look dramatic. So you can have shadows on people's faces that wouldn't really be there in real life, but they look better for when someone's talking to you. You can use shadow. Anyone who's ever taken a photograph of someone knows that, you can use shadows to completely change the look of someone's face. And they can do stuff like that if they're cheating the shadows in the first place and they're cheating the lighting. Whereas as soon as you start trying to render the lighting, authentically, then you're getting into all of the sorts of problems that filmmakers filming on location have to deal with. You think whenever you watch a film, the lighting in that isn't natural and real because behind the camera there's going to be massive lighting rigs and there's going to be like light being reflected and diffused all over the place to make stuff look better than it would in real life. In a game, you can't really do that, unless they do have some sort of special thing where the lighting changes depending on the camera. But, they're all choices. And if you've got a game where you're running around and you're looking around, suddenly it doesn't look quite as good. And I thought that's like a really kind of interesting... that's a really interesting idea of like, okay, how is is it better to have something that is lit authentically, or is it better to have something that is lit kind of dramatically and artistically? But yeah, if I just show you this tour, and I apologize for people who are watching on audio because you're not going to get all of this. But there's a really I think it's a really interesting kind of tour that Digital Foundry put together. This is Digital Foundry, who are like, I don't know if they're part of Eurogamer, but they work with Eurogamer. And so in this scene, you can see they'll do like I don't know if they're going to say what's on and what's not. We'll do some comparisons. Oh no, I think this is just a tour of it with it on. And yeah, like you can see when you look around the environment, like, oh, there's some like, orange light coming from the sunset, and then there's some like white light coming from artificial light, and you look at individual objects and you think, oh, I can kind of see how all of those things have combined to make something that does make more sense. Like when you think about it, it makes much more sense. But then when you look at the scenes themselves and you think about it in the gameplay terms of like, okay, if I was walking through this area, if I was like stumbling through it, would I notice any of it? Like, would it look dramatically better to me? Would I have a better experience because of the path ray tracing? And I kind of think no. Like, I kind of think this wouldn't look that much better. And it's a big leap. Like, someone in chat, Benchmark Boy, was just saying you should check the Portal with path ray tracing. Because that's another one of these games, like Minecraft and Quake 2, where they've done mods or done a version of it with ray tracing. And yeah, I've seen it. It looks way, way better. You've obviously got like the light coming off the portal's really interesting. You've got lots of harsh, like artificial light in Portal anyway. And I think the reason a lot of those games like Portal and Quake and Minecraft look so much better with the path ray tracing is that the lighting in those games was obviously super simple in the first place. So it's like suddenly going from very, very basic lighting to something that is much more complex and moves color around in more interesting ways and makes the game more colorful, is a huge upgrade. When you've got a game that was already trying to achieve the same kind of realistic effect, but just doing it in a cheaty way compared to doing it in a more authentic way, I think there's a much smaller jump. I think there's a much smaller kind of way, like a much smaller difference between them. And I genuinely don't know if it looks better. Like, I don't know if it's like if all of this ray tracing stuff actually makes the game look better or not. I don't really know. But, you know, it's interesting. I think it's an interesting thing that they have done. Oh, here we go. There's a comparison video for you there, where they actually jump between them. So you can see there on the left, you've got max rasterization, which is some other technology they use for it. And then on the right, you've got the real ray traced version. And it's like, okay, in the ray traced version, the light is blindingly bright at the end of an alleyway, and you can't really see anything past there. And then some of the objects, you know, you can see some areas of real darkness behind objects, and then you can see some like really bright highlights on the other side of it. And it's like, that does, when you're looking at it, make more sense. But if someone said to me, would you rather play the one on the left or the right, and the left being the old one and the right being the new one, I'd probably be like, yeah, probably the left one, because it kind of looks better from a gameplay term. You know, I can see things. And then, you know, again, here you've got an environment where you can see a little bit more of kind of, okay, there's light underneath these stairs where there wouldn't normally be. There's a little bit more color on the walls and around a burning bin and stuff like that. But does it look that much better when you're thinking about things like gameplay and actually being able to like move around a situation? This one looks quite cool, where this is like quite a dramatic thing where, okay, in the gameplay, so this is a character sitting in the back of a car looking at the player, talking to them. On the normal version of the game, the character is lit pretty uniformly, so you can see them, you can see what they're wearing, you can see their kind of expression, stuff like that. The ray tracing one, all of the light is just coming from behind them, so you can barely see the character really. You can kind of see their silhouette a little bit. And I think that actually works really well. That looks pretty cool, because not being able to see part of the character actually makes them look a bit more interesting. So like sometimes it works. But then there's other times, like here, you know, there's a good bit where you're talking to two people standing in an alleyway that's lit heavily with like a pink light. When you're looking at the ray tracing version, you can't see their faces, you can't see their expressions, you can't see the details on their clothes. And I think the one where you can see them probably looks a bit better to my eye. But yeah, anyway, we won't spend any longer on that, because I understand people that are listening to podcasts are probably like, what are they talking about? But check out Digital Foundry's ray tracing preview and ray tracing overviews, because I think they're quite interesting to look at. But my thoughts are overall on it are, and generally with ray tracing, is I don't think it's worth it. I don't think the cost to frame rate and the cost to the artistic intention of what the game should look like really is worth the extra, you know, like is worth it to get something that's a bit more authentic, but a little bit less arty, if you will. Obviously, over time, the technology will be easier. So more people will be able to experience it. You'll be able to experience it with higher frame rates and better resolutions. And designers will be able to base it around that, because most people will be using it rather than just the very, very high end. So obviously it will get better over time. But right now, I genuinely wouldn't be buying a graphics card because it does ray tracing. I wouldn't be like, oh, I need to get this particular model because the ray tracing on this one is better. It's just like, I've got a 3080, which is quite a capable graphics card. I turn ray tracing off on basically everything. Like any new game that comes out, if it's got a ray tracing option, I'm like, nope. I would much rather have a high frame rate rather than dealing with ray tracing or anything like that. The only exception, I think, is Watch Dogs Legion. Because Watch Dogs Legion, they were so happy with the ray tracing in it, they decided to put bloody mirrors absolutely everywhere in that game. And if you turn ray tracing off, there's just a load of grey rectangles around the map, which looks kind of silly. I think Watch Dogs Legion is the only game where I've been like, yeah, this probably does look better with the ray tracing on. It might be worth it. Anyway, we spent ages there, 20 minutes talking about that one news story. I definitely need to get better at timings on this. The second thing is Dead Island 2 is out. I might do a different episode where I do a bit more of like a deep dive into this, especially once I finish the game. But I've spent about 3 hours playing Dead Island 2 solo. I did that on stream yesterday on Twitch. And then I spent about the same amount of time, maybe a tiny bit less. Did it in co-op, like went through the same missions and stuff like that, but in co-op with my wife yesterday. And it's really good. Like, I genuinely think that game is super fun. And I want to maybe do a whole episode of the podcast at some point once I played it. Because I've seen lots of the reviews have been like, okay, Dead Island 2, it's like so much fun. It's like a throwback to those games of like 9 years ago, but in a positive way. It's quite simple, it's quite streamlined, but the writing's actually surprisingly funny. The combat feels pretty good. Pretty good. The world is super interesting, and there's always loads of things to find and look at. It's not like super repetitive like Dying Light 2 was. And then they've said 6 out of 10. And it's like, why is it 6 out of 10? They've been like, it's kind of like, what games were like back then. It's, not as complicated as some new games and stuff like that. And I just find that really bizarre that it's like, it's a super fun game that's obviously trying to be a kind of silly, mindless, gory, go smash up some zombies. And it does it so well. And it's so like, it's had a really positive release. It's not buggy. It's optimized really well on all the different platforms. It seems to be working really well. It's just like there's plenty of content. There's not like there's loads of like, you're not bothering about microtransactions and stuff like that. I know there is a deluxe edition of the game, like a gold edition or something. But generally, you're just kind of, you buy the game, you can enjoy the game. It works in co-op. It works single player. And it's just a lot of fun. And then people saying like, oh yeah, but that's not enough now. I think that's worthy of the whole podcast topic sometime. That's really, really interesting. Benchmark boys, you got a 4090. Oh, I am jealous. I mean, I suppose if you like benchmarks, then probably 4090 makes sense. But yeah, oh god, I would love to have a 4090, but I just can't justify it. Maybe when the 50 series comes out, I'll spend some money on a graphics card. But for now, I just can't justify that much money on one. Anyway, the next topic, speaking of realistic looking games actually, and graphics, is Unrecorded. This is a game that apparently, I was watching Jack Fragg's video about it, and he was saying how there'd been some video of it quite a long time ago that was just on Twitter and quite low resolution of this game where it's meant to be like a body cam first person shooter. So the camera angle's a little bit weird, like it's like someone's wearing a GoPro on their head, basically. And it's very, very realistic. It's sort of set in these kind of industrial areas, but it looks like, it could be anywhere in kind of, it could be anywhere in Europe, basically. And people running around shooting each other with incredibly realistic looking animations and environments. And they did a new video fairly recently where before it was like kind of low quality and some of the environments didn't look great because I think it was just like stock environments, like assets from Unreal Engine. This is an Unreal Engine 5 thing. He's released a high quality video, and it looks, to my mind at least, a bit disturbing. It's super impressive what I've been able to do, like no doubt about it. It's very impressive, like as a game, that something could look like that. But I would personally say it looks a bit too freaky. Like it just looks a little bit kind of unsettling, I think is the word. And I saw a couple of people talking about this. I saw well, I'm going to put Jack's video on there. There we go. I saw that Modern Warzone had talked about it, and a couple of other people, I think Trainwreck TV had talked about it. This idea that this game, there we go. Oh, it's playing an ad again. Brilliant. That this game maybe is crossing over that line into something where I would agree with all of those people that are like, video games are glorifying violence. Video games are making something that's, going to desensitize kids to real violence. And normally I'd say that kind of thing is utter nonsense. Normally I'd be like, no, that doesn't make sense. Like, video games, it's easy to detach video games from real life. But this, I don't know. I would say this is getting to the point where it's kind of, this looks a lot like a person walking into a building with a gun. And they do stuff, in there, like the people who they're fighting. I think some of the interesting things about it is the people who they're fighting are often running away. Like the people who are fighting are visibly scared. They blur out the faces of the people they're fighting as if this is some sort of like real footage. You can see all the animations, them running, leaning around a thing. The person's running a lot. They're putting their hand over their mouth and stuff like that. Lots of muzzle smoke and stuff. It's very kind of, it's very close to being the sort of footage that you'd see if someone had put on a camera and then gone and shot a bunch of people. And that's something that has happened. Like, people have done that repeatedly. Um and in recent history. And I don't know. I don't know why it's made such a reaction in me where I'm like, maybe this shouldn't be released as a game. Which, there's not been many games in the past where I felt like that. There's been a couple, like, some of the Postal games where it's sort of glorifying mass murder because you've been, like, wronged slightly, socially, people being a social outcast and feeling like they've been wronged going on a murdering spree. The Postal game's glorifying that. I was a bit uncomfortable about that. There was that 6 Days in Fallujah where it's kind of glorifying the kind of American soldiers going door to door in Iraq and killing lots of civilians and stuff like that. A game that seemed to be kind of making that into a video gamifying that, I think, was a bit weird. Even Call of Duty, like Call of Duty, the more recent games, I think they've treaded a little bit close to that, where it's like they're not making a political message. They're not saying, look how horrible this is. They're kind of saying, look how awesome it is when these soldiers go into other countries and kill people who probably don't need to be killed. It's like there's something a bit weird about it. But at least with video games, you've always got that backup of it's very distant from reality. As much as like news stories want to say that, like, the Columbine killers were that way because they played Doom 2, or somebody has gone on a shooting spree because they really like Call of Duty and they like the guns in Call of Duty. It always feels like a bit of a leap because it's like, Call of Duty is obviously fake. Like, anyone who picks up a gun in real life is immediately going to be like, oh, this isn't like Call of Duty. This gun is really heavy and awkward and cumbersome. Like that, all of that sort of stuff, there's a distance between it, a detachment. Whereas this game is like, hey, this is trying to look as close as possible to what this would actually look like, what this would actually be like. If they do something like in that, it looks like maybe you get score for doing stuff, if you get points for killing people and stuff like that. That feels like that could be doing something slightly weird to your brain of like detaching it from the horror of what's happening. Someone, in my mind at least, someone walking into a place with a gun and wanting to kill people should always be a horrible thing. Like, should always be a tragedy. Even if it's like there's hostage takers and you've got SWAT going in to try and kill the hostage takers to save the hostages, even then, I think the SWAT people shooting the obviously bad criminals should still be a horrible thing. Like, that's still like a tragedy. That's still, something terrible has gone wrong in society, that someone is using a tool to push a piece of metal as fast as possible through the flesh of another person to try and end their life. Like, that should be a horrific thing. And I think this game is at least looking like, and I don't know, we haven't seen very much of the game, but it looks like it might be just being like, hey, this is fun. This is a fun thing that people do. This is a fun thing that you can experience for yourself without the, pesky consequences. And I don't know. I don't know if that's okay. Like, I don't know if that's all right. The Silent Giant said, and I think it's billed as a single-player police detective story. Yeah, I only know that from what Jack Fragg's video said, where he said about, like, they said there's going to be difficult moral choices and dilemmas and stuff like that. But in the video, in the short trailer it showed him chasing down and killing quite a few people. And it's like, I'm just worried, like, if it's a sort of game where it's like, oh, you get a dilemma about whether to shoot someone or not when you're not really sure if they're armed, but then you chase after like 4 or 5 people and run down and gun them down. It's like, it's maybe weakening the thing. It's like Heavy Rain. I always thought Heavy Rain did some really interesting stuff. There's a David Cage game, one of those Quantic Dream games, where there's a scene early on where you're a policeman, you've got a gun trained on an enemy, and then they reach in their pocket, and you've got a split second to decide whether to shoot them because you think they're going for a gun, or whether to just see what happens, but then obviously risk dying. And it's like a horrific thing. Like, if you shoot that person, if you kill that person, you've got to kind of live with the consequence of, like, did you really have to do that? Like, was that the only way to get out of that? And the game didn't force you to do it. The game didn't make you kill that person. You chose to kill them. And I think that's a really interesting thing. But then Heavy Rain ruins it by then having a level, a mission or whatever, a scene a couple of hours later where you're walking through a mansion gunning down like 30 hired goons as if, oh, they all deserve to die because they took a paycheck from someone to guard his house. Like, it's like this weird kind of disconnect of like the video gamey thing of these are bad guys, you can shoot them and feel fine. But this character, this matters. You get that a lot in like not first person, or single player, like adventure games and stuff like that. Think of games like Uncharted or Tomb Raider or Jedi Fallen Order or stuff like that, where God of War, even Last of Us, where there'll be like Last of Us, actually quite a good example. Last of Us Part 2 is probably my favorite game of all time, and there's scenes in that where a main character is deciding whether or not to kill another main character, and it's presented as this huge ethical dilemma, and it's obviously causing them a lot of angst and trauma, rightfully so. But then you got to think, but you did just kill like 50 people on the way here. Like, you did just kill loads of people, and you had no idea who they were. You had no idea what their backstory was. Their problem was that they were in your way, and like you just gunned them down. I always do think that there's like a big space in gaming for someone to take that idea and run with it. For like the focus of a story being, do you need to kill these people? Like making killing seem something that's much, much more like, I don't know what the word is, impactful. I would love it. I know they won't do it because it would be commercial suicide, but I would love it if like GTA 6, if you kill someone in GTA 6, you get out of your house at the beginning of the game, you're wandering around, you get your first weapon, and then you see it, you do that thing that people do in GTA where it's like, oh, someone, I just want to see what happens, I'm going to shoot them. If you shoot that person and then your character starts like shaking and can't really control themselves, can't speak properly, the police are actually doing like a full-on investigation to come and find you. Like, they are hounding you down. If you kill a police officer, it becomes, a much, much bigger deal where like everyone's like trying to get you, and like even, your friends and family are alienated from you when they find out what you've done. Your face is on every TV screen saying like, this person is at large. They're shutting down city blocks trying to find you. They just have it so like, if you kill a single person, there are huge, huge, huge impacts that, like echo out, and it sort of can ruin your life very easily. Like, that'd be super interesting. That'd be like a much more interesting thing to play. And like I said, games like don't do that, and games have a disconnect, and there's the cartoonish violence thing. And obviously I'm fine with it. I play a lot of Call of Duty, I play Grand Theft Auto and all of this sort of stuff. I was just talking about Dead Island, and I don't mind the city violence. But when you've got something that's crossing the line into something that looks a lot like real life, I don't know. I don't know if you should be desensitizing people to that. I don't know if you should be playing off as in like, you killed this person, 400 points. I think that's weird. I do think that's weird. And it's partly why, and I've said this a few times on the podcast before, I'm kind of a bit more drawn to games where like you're fighting robots, or you're fighting zombies, or you're fighting aliens. I've always found it weird. Like, I remember distinctly playing Uncharted 1, and I didn't play it at launch. I played it quite a long time after it came out. And I remember people talking about how good Uncharted was and how funny it was, and it looked really realistic for the time, it looked really good. And all I could think of was like, Nathan Drake is a mass murderer. Like, Nathan Drake murders so many people in that game who aren't really doing anything that wrong. They work for someone who's a bit evil, maybe. But do they even know what the plan is? Or did they just take a job guarding some docks, or guarding an archaeological dig, or something like that? There's a lot of people who are just kind of minding their own business, and you're just murdering them. And it's like, they probably have families. They probably had, they had a childhood. They have someone waiting for them, and they don't come home, something like that. It's a very kind of... I found it very weird. Like, it's something that I don't think Uncharted deals with at all. It's just like how many people Drake has killed. And, Last of Us Part 2 does deal with it a little bit. There's a bit more of kind of humanizing every side in the conflicts that you're a part of. So it's kind of like, you see, hey, when you've done this, you've actually really hurt somebody else. You've actually really messed up someone else's life. There's a bit more of that. Still not to like the extent I think it needs, but there's a bit more of that. Silent Giant said Deus Ex had a lot of disconnect scenarios as well, simulation versus gamey elements. Yeah, and I think with older games, it was like, it was always kind of, what are you going to do? Like, there's a way of doing games, a way of making action in games, a way of making tension in games. And back when animation was very simple and you didn't have like motion capture and necessarily voice acting and stuff like that, it's a bit harder to create drama in other ways. But, killing and death is a very easy way to show like power and loss, and so going all the way back to Space Invaders, where they made it so you destroyed the enemies because then it freed up more memory and the game would go faster, and it was all like a very easy way of showing progress. You destroy things, you clear them off the memory, like the game works very simply, and it gives you a sense of progression. But as games go on, as they get more complicated, I think there's space for more nuance. Maybe like we can still kill robots or whatever. Who cares? But yeah, well, I mean, Detroit obviously brings up that issue. But when it comes to killing people, I feel like it's a little bit basic, a little bit kind of. We could be doing something more interesting. House UK said played Ready or Not or the old SWAT games. I have played the old SWAT games. I haven't played Ready or Not. I've seen Jack's videos on them. I thought. Yeah, again, like that's kind of a little bit what Silent Giant's talking about with Deus Ex. Like the SWAT games have an interesting kind of approach to it of, like, oh, sometimes they push you and say like you should arrest people, you should try and do this with no casualties, etc., etc. And it's like, but I imagine most people who played SWAT killed a lot of people, killed a lot of bad guys. And I think, anyone who gets to a certain age, I don't know when it is, like, I imagine for a lot of people it's when you're like 18, you get to a point where you realize that all of the bad guys you see on the news and you see in these, in movies and in games and stuff like that, their equivalents in real life probably don't see themselves as bad guys, and they are still real people. Sometimes they could be messed up people, but they are still people. And they probably don't deserve to have someone kicking down the door and shooting them dead. And I think, a big part of this probably also comes from, it was particularly talking about games like SWAT, comes from living in the UK, where if the police shoot someone, it's a big deal. Like, it's national news if the police shoot someone. Even if a lot of people would say they deserved it, it's still like, oh, I don't know how we feel about that. Like, the police deciding to execute someone. Like, we don't have the death penalty in any way in this country. We don't believe that people should be killed for their crimes. And so the police making a decision to kill someone is kind of, a difficult thing to deal with. It's a difficult thing to justify. And, sometimes people do it of like, oh, they were killing so-and-so because they killed one person because then that saved like another 4 or 5 people. When you've had like the terrorist attacks and someone said that they're going to blow up a bridge or whatever, and kill everyone around them, then they've killed that person to try and save everyone else. That's like kind of a different situation. You can understand it, that their hand is forced, but making the decision to kill someone who didn't necessarily need to be killed is a very different thing. Whereas I think in other countries, like America, obviously, people have a different relationship with that, where, some people are like, well, they committed a crime, they die. That's not something that I can really, not something that I can easily deal with. But yeah, the Ready or Not thing's an interesting thing. I have asked to play that game. I did request a code from them, but they never gave me one. So I don't know. This episode is going to go long. I'm warning you now. I need to go to hospital at 11. Nothing serious, don't worry. Got like a thing on my tongue, and I'm slightly worried they're going to check it out, and I'm slightly worried that they're just going to cut it off, which is what I want, ideally. There's a thing on my tongue. I would like it to not be there anymore. But I also don't want them to be like, surprise, here's a scalpel. Like, chop, chop, chop. I want to be mentally prepared for it. So I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a bit like, oh, is it going to be okay? If I'm not streaming later, you know why? It's because they cut off a piece of my tongue. Anyway, so next topic, next thing. We've still got 2 news stories. We haven't even got onto the main topic of today's thing. We've only got 20 minutes left. So the next news stories will fly through quickly. First of all, Disney Speedstorm came out as an early access game and apparently kind of spectacularly messed up their launch. So this is something mostly coming from IGN. There's an IGN article about it, but it was a really interesting read. I still haven't got access to Disney Speedstorm because they said that I would get a code, so I didn't want to buy it because, I don't want to spend 25 quid if they're going to give me one for free. And then they said, oh, but we just need Disney to okay it. They need to go backwards and forwards. And then they just haven't. And it's like the game's been out for like over a week now. I don't know if I really am even that interested in streaming it once like the initial launch buzz has gone down. But now there's been some quite negative articles come out. And one of the big things is, okay, the karting's fun and that's all the stuff that I did in the beta. The karting is fun. It's got split screen, which is cool. It's got online races. The characters are cool. The maps are cool. All of that stuff's good. But apparently there's like 20 different currencies. It's like, oh, you get one currency for doing races and winning races. You get another currency for using specific characters. You get another currency that you can sometimes pick up around a track. There's another currency that you can buy. There's another currency that you get by buying the season pass and then leveling up the season pass, and you get a different currency from doing that. And some of the currencies will buy you cosmetic things in the game. Some of the currencies will let you upgrade your character, which you have to do in order to stay competitive as you work through the campaign. And it's like, this sucks. Like, when will games learn that you just don't need a million different currencies? Like, it's nearly always a bad thing. Like, I don't like it in Call of Duty that we have XP, which, you use XP the first time you level up to like unlock guns and stuff. But then after that, you just sort of get, I don't know what you get from XP, like badges or calling cards or something. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Then you have your battle pass level, which obviously resets every season, and then you use that to unlock stuff on a battle pass that you've paid for, but you need to like spend time playing the game in order to get the things that you've paid for, which is slightly weird. Not a big fan. Much prefer the way Fortnite does that, where you do challenges to get stuff. Anyway, so you have that. Then you have, like, if you do ranked, obviously you've got SR, so you've got like skill rating. So you get points or lose points based on that. Like, that's a completely separate thing. Then you have all of the XP tokens. You've got weapon XP tokens, you've got player XP tokens, and you've got battle pass XP tokens. So you've got like 3 different things there that sometimes you earn by getting them in a battle pass. Sometimes they just give them for free because you watch CDL or something like that. Like, you just get those sometimes, and you can spend them to increase your XP, which is, another kind of rating, another skill thing, I don't know, another thing. And then you have COD points, and the COD points you can sometimes get from the battle pass. You also use them to spend them on a battle pass, and you can spend them on the store to get cosmetics. But there's some things on the store that you can't use COD points for. You have to use real money for, but then you get COD points as a part of those bundles from the store. And the COD points, if you buy COD points and you're on Xbox and then you start playing Warzone on PlayStation, you don't have those COD points anymore. They're still on your Xbox. Or, you enter a code, you do your battle pass, which you bought on Xbox, you play a bit on PC and you got levels. Now you've got a couple of hundred COD points on your PC account, which can't transfer back to your Xbox account. And it's like, that's just Call of Duty. And Call of Duty essentially has one currency, but also has all of these different tokens, all of these different progression systems. And I would say, even as someone that plays a lot of Call of Duty, I'm a bit like, that's too much. Like, that's kind of nonsense. Like, I don't really care about all of these different things. Like, they just make it more complicated than it needs to be. Disney Speedstorm is a very simple game compared to Call of Duty, and has now come out and been like, oh yeah, there's like a million different currencies. And some of them you can buy with real money, some of them you get in game, some of them you spend on cosmetics, some of them you spend on gameplay things. It just seems like a mess. And, there's other games like Avengers had the same thing. It looks like Justice League was going to before it got delayed. I don't know whether they'll still keep that. It's like, I really wish games would stop trying to just make out that the game is more interesting because there's more progression systems. Like, I think that's the thing that I don't like. I don't think having more progression systems makes a game more fun. I think having a good progression system makes a game more fun. Like Diablo, you've got the thing of constantly, you like level up, and then you have the getting better weapons, and weapons have interesting effects, and then you have paragon points as well. And it's like, there's a certain level of complexity and depth in that, but you don't have to worry about, it's like, when you're playing through it, you really start off just worrying about your XP, and then you start off worrying about like your item level and your XP, and then your XP becomes irrelevant because you get to max level, so you don't need to worry about that anymore, and then you start worrying about paragon points. It's kind of, you only have like 2 things to really worry about at a time, or 3, I suppose. Where some games are just like, no, we'll just keep on putting systems and systems and systems, and all of them are essentially just play the game for longer, get more things, win games, get more things, give us money, get more things. And it makes it confusing. I just think it's like, it makes it less fun overall. And lots of like mobile games and things like that really sort of rely on there being lots of them, and I'm not a fan. I'm not keen on any of that. Right, and then number 5, the new Diablo 5 beta. So this is very exciting news, tinged with a little bit of sadness. So talking about Diablo, there's a little bit of a segue there. I'm slowly getting better at this. They're doing a new beta, which is super exciting, something I really wanted, another chance to play the game before it comes out at the beginning of June. They're doing what they're calling a server slam. So this is May 12th to 14th, which is, what's that, 2 weeks away. So 2 weeks on Friday. 2 weeks on Friday. They're going to do server slam. They're just going to open it up to everyone. Going to be another open beta. Everyone can get on there. Everyone can try and get some of the beta rewards. So I still don't have the one for killing the world boss. Every time I've gone in there, there's been a load of really low level people. It's really annoying, and there was only like 3 opportunities to do it before. So there's gonna be another opportunity to kill the world boss. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to playing it. They have done something stupid though, because the day it starts is the day Zelda Tears of the Kingdom comes out. So now we've got Diablo, the game I'm probably the second game I'm most excited about this year, Starfield probably being the first, but you know, Diablo is pretty close behind. Doing a playtest I really want to be a part of, trying some of the new changes they've made to classes and stuff like that, at the same time as one of the most anticipated games for most people of the year is coming out, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Now, you know, I'm sure there'll be loads of queues with the Diablo beta, so I imagine what'll probably happen is I'll come to stream the Diablo beta and I'll have my Switch and I'll be playing my Switch, playing Zelda while I wait for the queues in Diablo. That seems like the most likely situation, so maybe it's best of both worlds. We'll have something to play while I wait for Diablo. But part of me just wants to sink into... Oh, Diablo, did I say Diablo 5? Sorry, Diablo 4. Someone in chat just corrected me. But yeah, I feel like I want to, you know, sink into Zelda. I don't want to be splitting my attention. But that first weekend Zelda's out, now I've got Diablo to play as well. You know, lovely first world problem to have, but still, don't know. I feel like I'm probably going to pay more attention to Diablo, and then I'll play Zelda once the weekend's over. That's more likely to happen, but we'll see. So, moving on to the main topic today, and this is something, like I said, we'll probably overrun because there's something I do want to talk about a bit. I want to give my full attention to, and that is Expel, who is a YouTube content creator, for Call of Duty content creator. He's got like 340,000 subs on YouTube. You know, he's a big deal, big content creator. On Twitter, he's got like less followers. You know, it's like 13. Well, how many followers he got? Yeah, 14,000. So kind of similar to me on Twitter, really, weirdly. We do follow each other. I don't know him. Like, we haven't had any big conversations, I don't think. Like, we've never, I just had to double check. We've never sent direct messages or anything like that. I think we just follow each other because Call of Duty content creators often do. But yeah, he did a tweet that went viral the other day, and I think it's interesting to have a look at. And I think the responses have been interesting. Where it's come from a tweet. I'll start out with saying this, that I don't agree with him. I think he did a bad tweet. I think it was quite rude. But I also saw lots of people agreeing with him, and I think that's kind of an interesting look at kind of where we're at with the Call of Duty community right now, but also in gaming discourse in general, the kind of interesting relationship between people that play games, people that watch streamers, people who are streamers and content creators, and then community managers, and then developers. I think there's like a really interesting set of kind of interactions there that, to me at least, I have a clear idea of how that whole interaction should work. And I think other people have a very different idea of how it should work. So we'll talk about, I'll go through his tweet, I'll talk about it, I'll talk about what I kind of disagree with about it. We'll go through it step by step, and then we'll look at a few of the responses, stuff like that. But do let me know in chat as I go through. And if you're listening to this after I've recorded it, then by all means, do have a look at things like, you know, leave a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. I would be super interested. Or if you listen to this on Spotify or something, why not come over to Twitter and let me know what you think on Twitter? But basically, for the too long didn't read version of it, Expel said to the COD developers in a tweet, hey, you clearly don't know what the community wants or what the game needs, so let me help you. Which I thought was kind of a rude way to take. But he did this tweet that's very lovely formatted. I'll show you in a second and read through it. But he was basically like, you clearly don't understand what's going on here, so let me tell you what you need to do, which I thought was kind of rude. Lots of developers quote tweeted it, lots of Call of Duty developers, but also developers from all across the industry, from loads of different games, tweeted with something along the lines of, you clearly don't understand game development, so maybe stop saying stuff like this. And then Expel replied with another tweet saying, well, developers don't care to explain themselves, so gamers can't really give feedback. And he was kind of doing it in a tone where he was saying, to me at least, it sounded like he was saying that developers were in the wrong for not taking the time to educate people about game development so that gamers can give appropriate feedback. That's basically what happened. But let's look at the individual tweets anyway, because like I said, I think it's kind of interesting. So, I'll zoom in a bit so you can see it. There we go. So, Expel said, and I'll just read this out to begin with. You know what? I'll read out each section and then I'll talk about each section. That probably makes more sense. So he said, "Dear at Call of Duty." So tagged him, clearly tagging him in. It wasn't like a subtweet type thing. He was clearly just talking straight to it. Says, "You seemingly don't understand how to make your Warzone fan base happy. Here's a thread to help." So straight away, reading that first sentence, and like to Expel's credit, he has since said he probably didn't word this very well. It came across as a bit ruder maybe than he wanted it to, like a bit more confrontational than he wanted it to. But, you know, straight away saying you don't understand how to make your Warzone fan base happy, there's a lot within that, saying, you know, who is he thinking of as the Warzone fan base? Is he talking about, you know, all the people that everyone who plays it, or is he talking about like the Twitter people? Is he talking about his community? Like, I don't know. It's a very difficult thing. I saw someone replied to a tweet in this saying like, just because you have a community doesn't mean you are the community. And I think they were really talking about like Charlie Intel and Mon Warzone. You know, when Mon Warzone does his surveys where he's like, hey, like 100,000 people said, like replied to this survey, and 80% of them think Warzone 1 is better than Warzone 2 or whatever, 96% or whatever it is. And then he always says like, you know, 100,000 people responded, so this survey is reliable. And it's always like, you know, the obvious thing to say about that when you look at it is like 100,000 people who already follow you. So 100,000 people who probably already agree with a lot of your takes about things. They're probably the sort of people, you know, they're the sort of people that are following Call of Duty stuff on Twitter. They're the sort of people who are following, you know, an account that was mostly leaks and sort of, you know, some slightly kind of toxic stuff, a little bit of YouTube, Twitter drama and things like that. So, like an account that's had like lots and lots of controversy surrounding it. Like, you've got a sample that are already the sort of people that like that want to follow that are a part of that. You know, and not all of them will necessarily be into that. Maybe some people just follow them, you know, like I've followed Elon Musk before because it's like, not because I love the guy, but because it's kind of, you know, interesting watching what kind of car crash he's going to say next. Like there could be people like that, but generally it's like you've got a very biased sample in the first place. Even if that sample's very big, you then don't know how many people haven't replied to your survey. You don't know how many people play Call of Duty who haven't replied to it. And it's a bit more difficult. And it's the same sort of thing, you know, Charlie Intel literally said to me, you know, they did a thing right when Warzone 2 came out saying, the community doesn't want blah, blah, blah. You know, the community doesn't want the 2v2 gulag. The community doesn't want, I think it was red dots on the map is what he was talking about. He was like, the community want red dots back on the minimap. Like, they don't want this thing where, like, loud footsteps and all this sort of stuff. It's only casuals who want that. And I replied to Charlie Intel being like, hey, I'm a part of the community and I do want these things. I do like the changes. I'm excited about them. Can you not say the community wants this when, you know, you're not reflecting like what I say? And like Charlie Intel literally replied to me on the official account. Keshav was the guy who runs it, was like saying to me, well, like, you're just a casual, so you don't take the game very seriously. And he said, so he called me a casual, first of all, you know, even though a big part of like kind of what I do for a living revolves around Call of Duty. And then he was saying, I don't agree with your opinions or your perspective, so I don't need to represent it. And that to me rubbed me up the wrong way, like really badly, where he's saying like, he's tweeting out things as one of the biggest voices in the community because he's got the most followers, him to be going out and saying, the community wants this, or the community doesn't want this, or nobody asked for this, or everybody wants this. And then for someone in that community, and I would say, you know, I'm not exactly a nobody in the community. I know I'm not nowhere near in his league, but I'm still still a person in the community with a bit of a voice and a bit of a following. For me to say like, hey, no, I don't think that. I don't think that's right. And then him to say, yeah, but your opinion doesn't matter because I don't agree with it. It's like, oh, okay, so now you're just talking for everyone and you're deciding your opinion is the only one that matters, not the people that follow you, not the people who think something different to you. And that's really dangerous. And I think that's why it's really difficult saying stuff like how to make your Warzone fan base happy, because it makes it sound like you're speaking for more people than you are. It's like if I went on the internet now and said like, dear Call of Duty, everybody in the Call of Duty community thinks that we need the 2v2 gulag back. Everyone I know who plays Call of Duty wants them to get rid of loadouts. And then obviously people will be like, you don't speak for the Call of Duty community, like how dare you? And it's like, but they're doing it. Like, what? And it's like, even though obviously I know I only speak to and interact with a very small minority of the Call of Duty player base, so does everyone else. Even if they've got 1 million people following them and interacting with them, that's still a minority of the player base. Like, it's still ridiculous. So yeah, I don't like that. Anyway, said the next bit that was a bit annoying. Here's a thread to help. That's really condescending, and that's something that as a creator I've spoken out about lots of times, particularly to viewers, to be honest. I've probably had a go at some of you about this, but lots of the time when people say things and they're like, hey, like, I'm just trying to help. Like, they'll say things like, I'll be trying to work out like a challenge in Call of Duty, and I'll be like talking about being like, oh, I wonder if it's this, this, this. And then someone comes in and says, it's this, this, and this. You do this, and then this happens, and they just spoil the whole puzzle. And then I'm like, what the hell? You just spoiled it. Like, you spoiled all the fun of trying to work it out. And they say, like, I was just helping you. Like, it's so rude of you. You're, like, getting angry at me, but I was just helping. And it's like people seem to think that when they say they're helping, that means that they are. Like, it's like the same sort of people who say, like, not being rude, or, like, not being offensive. It's like, you don't get to decide whether you're being rude or whether you're helping or anything like that. Unsolicited advice is super annoying. Like, I get it quite a lot, of YouTube videos and streams and stuff like that. People come into the streams, people come into the videos, and they're like, oh, you need to do this, this, and this to change your camera, or to change your audio, or to change the way you play Warzone, or anything like that. And they'll just tell you to do something differently. And it's like, they don't know you. They're literally a complete stranger. You don't know them. They don't know you. They're just telling you how to do something differently. And then from their perspective, they're like, well, I'm just helping. I'm just helping you. Like, you should thank me for the help. And it's like, that's so bloody rude. Because within that, there's a lot of, like, assumptions. You're assuming that they don't know the thing that you're saying. So you're assuming that they're stupider than you about something, or more ignorant than you about something. They're assuming that, like, you're assuming that they haven't thought about that thing, maybe. Even though maybe, there's a good reason why things are the way they are. Maybe there's a good reason they made the decisions they do that you couldn't possibly know about because you don't know them and you don't know their situation. You don't know their setup. Like, it's one of the rudest things. I've laughed about this with creators quite a lot, is when you've been streaming for a while and then someone comes in and it's like saying, like, you've got some problem where it's like the picture doesn't look very clear. And they're like, did you know, like, you can increase the bitrate in OBS? And it's like, yeah. I did know that. Everyone knows that. Everyone who's like, literally everyone who's ever streamed using OBS knows, like, you have to set the bitrate and what the bitrate means and stuff like that. And by giving that advice, giving something that you thought was helpful, you've now made that person think like, oh, so you think I'm an idiot? I see. Like, you think I'm doing this and don't know what I'm talking about. And obviously it's like worse for some group, like men are a lot worse doing this, like mansplaining stuff, especially to women creators and stuff like that. You see it a lot more. And like fan communities are like this towards developers. They're just like, hey, did you think of this? Like, have you tried this? And it's like, yes, obviously. And the fact that you're bringing that up is kind of an insult, to be honest. And like, I know, like, people who are watching videos often don't get that. They don't get why it would be rude or annoying. And it's because from their perspective, this is one interaction that's happening once. And it's like, obviously from the creator's interaction, this is something that's happened dozens of times or hundreds of times. And it gets very, very tiring having people just assume that they know more than you about stuff. And that's not to say that the creator always does know more, but normally, if, say if I was having a problem with a stream, say if I was like, okay, my quality is lower than I would like it to be, and I need to fix it. I obviously have ways of working out how to fix that. Like, I would obviously, like, maybe I'd Google it. Maybe I'd ask one of my creator friends who also I know are successful and make good quality streams and do stuff that I understand. I could ask them about it and talk to them about it off stream when I'm not talking and stuff like that. Like, that would be a much better situation. Sometimes, while I'm streaming, I'll be like, hey, does the audio sound okay? And I'm asking a direct question. Then it's fine. Like, then it's fine to be like, yeah, it sounds a little bit fuzzy, or like, yeah, it's loud, or like, yeah, it's super clear. Whatever, that's fine. But when someone is like just doing something, like just playing, just enjoying themselves, and then you're like, you should do this, this, and this, you're immediately setting up this weird relationship where you're like, I'm helping you because I'm better than you. And it's like, oh, it's so rude. It's so very, very upsetting, really. It's very annoying. But anyway, that's just me ranting about that. So let's go back to this tweet. So Expel said, fix your awful servers. straight away, like, you know, the language here, fix your awful servers. It's like, hey, these are the Call of Duty servers that, as far as I know, we were talking about this on the Discord a little bit yesterday, I can't remember any significant period of downtime on the servers ever. Like, considering Call of Duty is one of the most played games in the world, and they're constantly updating stuff. It's running on, you know, PC, on Switch, not on Switch, on Xbox and on PlayStation. You have servers where there's 150 people playing on top of like AI and vehicles and all of that kind of stuff in loads of different game modes and all that sort of stuff. And they're saying like, your servers are awful. It's like, what are you comparing these to, Expel? What are you saying is what's the other game that's doing what Warzone's doing? Where you're like, hey, like, this is like, yours are clearly awful because look at these much better ones. And that's something I see a lot with like feedback to Call of Duty is like, this is awful, like this is terrible, this is embarrassing. And it's like, where's the example of another company that did it? Where's the example of a time where someone did the same thing but better? Because like occasionally, and in this one he goes on to compare it to Fortnite, which we'll talk about in a bit, but it's like they're doing other things very differently. They have different problems. You don't know you aren't in a position to like judge it. You're not in a position to say whether their servers are awful or anything like that. Like, you can say like, hey, the servers have problems, and they obviously know the servers have problems. Like, clearly the servers have problems right now. But saying they're awful isn't pointing out a problem. It's saying that like the quality of them or the setup of them is bad. Like, imagine if you're like a network engineer working on Call of Duty or something, and then you read that and it says like, fix your awful servers, and it's like, that's gonna suck. You know, you've just been spending hours trying to work on problems that literally no one else has ever had to solve before, and then someone's like, you're doing an awful job. It's like with SpaceX launching Starship and that exploding the other day, and people being like, well, obviously, like, blah, 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 blah. It's like, you're literally sort of arguing with actual rocket scientists saying that they're doing an awful job. Like, compared to what? Like, compared to, like, what's going on? But anyway, yeah, so it says, Fortnite has rarely has any sorts of problems with their servers, even though they constantly have more players online. This, first of all, isn't true. I've played plenty of Fortnite games with lots of lag and bits of desync and, like, issues with it, especially when you're not playing the main mode, when you're playing any of the other modes. But also, you know, Fortnite is a very different thing that's running in a very different way. It doesn't have necessarily a lot of the complexity that maybe Warzone has. You know, and a lot of things about Fortnite are very, very different. So I don't think it's massively helpful to say, well, Fortnite rarely has any sorts of problems with their servers. And then, like, interestingly, if you look at the quote tweets, this person was saying, tell me you have no idea how to run and develop a live service game without telling me you have no idea how to run and develop a live service game. And then, like, with a lot of these people who did quote tweets, I thought, oh, I'll just have a look at what his name is. So, like, hover over it. Like, oh, he's a senior programmer at Epic Games on Fortnite. So, like, Expel here is saying, like, well, Fortnite doesn't have these problems. And you've got one of the senior programmers on Fortnite, which is the game he's saying is doing a better job than Call of Duty, chipping in on this and being like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like, that's, you know, that's should be a sign that maybe you've, like, said something wrong. Anyway, then he says, desync shouldn't be an issue, so higher tick rates would help too. I don't know everything about game development. I don't know very much about game development. I do know that I don't know. I'd assume higher tick rate probably isn't the solution for something like desync. Like, there is some severe desync where two different versions, to me, desync is when two different versions of the game, so two people playing the game, or the server and the client, have a different idea of what's going on. They are now desynchronized. Like, they have a different idea. Halo Infinite had it really bad where players could seem like they were in a completely different part of the map, depending on which version of the game you're looking at. And this does happen in Call of Duty. I did a video about it where if you run someone over but you don't kill them, sometimes on your screen they are dead, but on their screen they're not, and therefore on your game they're invisible and they're desynchronized, and they can kill you while being invisible. That is not to do with tick rates. Tick rates is just how fast the server calculates everything that's happening. So obviously your server's constantly getting all of the information about all of the different, like, what every single player is choosing to do, what their inputs are, you know, and then it does all of the maths and everything to work out what happens next, almost like a turn in like an RPG. And it's like saying, like, okay, this person did this person did this person did this person shot this person. And then it works out what actually happened, because obviously you know, you have one player saying that they fired their gun, but actually the server's like, actually someone else had fired their gun just before you. So even though your game didn't know about that, you're actually dead already. But, you know, the internet takes a long while to send a signal to you, you know, 200 milliseconds or something to send it to you. So you didn't know, so your gunshot didn't actually happen. All of that sort of stuff has to be worked out by the server. And how many times per second it does that is the tick rate. And I've heard people saying that Warzone has like a 20 hertz tick rate, which is 20 times a second. You know, so that's 20 times a second. The server's working out what 150 different people are doing and then sending that information back to them. 20 times a second. That's insane. And people are saying, like, you know, oh, they should do it 60 frames. They should do it 60 hertz servers. They should do 120 hertz servers. You know, and then they'll look at games like Valorant or Counter-Strike and be like, well, they're doing it. You know, Counter-Strike's now doing tickless ones where it's just everything's happening instantly, which I still don't really understand. But yeah, it's like, would that help with desync? Like, I'm not really convinced that that would be the solution. But also, just saying higher tick rates would help. It's like, what is one of the Call of Duty engineers going to be sitting there and being like, oh, I didn't think of increasing the tick rate. Let's just whack that tick rate up from 20 to 60. That'll solve all the problems. Thanks, Expel. It's like, obviously not. Obviously, they will have the tick rate at the highest rate they can for everything they're doing. Obviously. Why would they not? Why would they choose to be like, no, we want the server to work things out a little bit slower? Like, obviously, there's going to be reasons, and there could be a million different reasons why they're doing that. Anyway, well, this can take forever if I do it this slowly. So stop removing playlists, solos, duos, trios, and quads for every single mode. It's really not that hard to understand. Again, like the attitude of that, it's not that hard to understand. Seems very rude. If Fortnite can do it, so can you. You know, again, it's this kind of thing of like he's just like come to this idea, this understanding of like, well, I've got an idea in my head of how this works, so this must be right. So if Fortnite can have all of these different playlists, then you must be able to too. Maybe, and again, I don't know about game development, so I don't know what's really going on, but just throwing out some ideas that might make a problem of this. Maybe if they split up into more playlists, there'll be less people in each individual playlist, so matchmaking will be worse. So maybe matchmaking times would take longer, which they are a little bit longer in Fortnite. Maybe Fortnite's got more people. Maybe they don't mind that in Fortnite, some of the playlists you can go onto it and then you have to wait a very, very long time for a game. Maybe that's a thing. Maybe Fortnite has less of a kind of thing. You know, maybe in Warzone, realistically, there's like 1 million people playing quads and only 100,000 people at any time playing solos. And in Fortnite, they don't have that problem. Maybe in Fortnite, it's much more evenly spaced out that people play all of the different modes. There could be a ton of different reasons why they don't do this. Maybe it's to do with the servers. Maybe having like so many different servers running different kinds of game modes is more of a problem and adds complexity. Maybe they've got like a limit where they've got like 8 server configurations because of something to do with the way the code works. They've got like 8 different server configurations at a time. You know, I'm just making these numbers up. So they have to just limit them. So if they add a limited time mode, they have to take something away somewhere else to make it all work. Like, we have no idea, and Expel has no idea. So it's a little bit silly. QA test at scale before an update. This is a terrible idea. And again, quite insulting to a lot of people. Instead of simply releasing an update, so kind of implying that they just release an update without testing it, which obviously isn't true. Like, you don't have to know anything about game development to know that's not true. They do not release updates without testing them. That's just insane. Have 300 plus creators play it for 1 day, 1 week before launch. So, this is a game that updates at the least every month. Realistically, they actually release updates about every week. So normally there's an update every week for Call of Duty. Someone did a list, someone did a thing. I think they talked about it on the Discord. Well, I'll just try and find it. Where they someone found a table of how often Call of Duty's been updated. But it's lots. Don't know if I can find it now. But yeah, someone, maybe they tweeted it to me. Someone did a thing where they said like, hey, this is like how many times Call of Duty updates. And Call of Duty updates a lot. Like, oh, here we go. Yeah. Opening browser. So this is this. This was just since Warzone 2's come out, the updates. So you can say like, so there was, the game came out. A day later there was an update. 4 days later after that there was an update. A day later after that there was an update. A week after that there was an update. Then 2 weeks before the next update. 2 days after that, an update. A day after that, an update. 2 days after that, an update. Then there was like the Christmas break, so there was quite a long gap. There was, but I say a long gap. What, 22 days before an update? It's like 3 weeks before that update. Then 2 days later, another update. 2 days later, another update. 6 days later, another update. 1 day later, another update. 4 days later, another update. 5 days later, another update. And then another update the same day. And then 2 weeks again until the next update. Because I think before they do a season, they sort of wait to do a lot of the stuff because they're probably changing a lot. It doesn't make sense to do the changes on an old version of the game. Anyway. Can you imagine if every one of those updates, they got 300 creators to download a special build of the game, obviously ignoring all of the leaks and things like that, and then they want them to play it for a day. So it's like, what, do they have an NDA? Do those creators, do they get to make content about it a week before launch? Like, so then people will get annoyed that the creators are making content about stuff that they haven't seen yet. That seems unlikely. So are they going to pay all of those creators to go and take a day off to go test the game for a patch? Are they going to do it for every patch, or are they just going to do it for the season update? So that's every 2 months. Getting 300 people to play the game every 2 months would be a pretty rough thing to do. Like, I feel like that would be a pretty difficult thing to do. But anyway, even if the practicalities of it all worked out and they managed to get 300 people, they got a team of people to play the game just before it's an update. Battlefield does something vaguely similar. They don't do it with 300 people. That's insane. But they do get a group of people to play a lot of their major updates a bit before launch. Doing it a week before launch, do you think they're then good? Like Expel says, we will immediately tell you around 95% of problems. First of all, that's kind of implying that creators are somehow better than QA testers, which, obviously do this for a living. So he thinks that 95% of problems in the game will be picked up by 300 creators who aren't QA testers, who aren't trained to do that they'll be able to sort of work out problems. And then a week before launch, that they'll be able to fix those problems, because they would fix their problems and then they need to do another playtest. They need to check it again. Like, a week is no time at all. I imagine a lot of the things that will be in fixes that will come out on the 15th of next month, on the 15th of May, or whenever the update is, it'll be sometime around then. A lot of those fixes, I imagine, have probably been worked on since December. They've probably been something that's been worked on for months and months and months. They're not the sort of thing where it's like a week before launch, they're just like quickly being like, oh, we just found this new problem that we're going to try and fix. Like, that's insane. And then also, you've got like the 300 creators playing it for one day. That's like wrong in both directions. That it's like, it's not enough people to find all the problems. When they launch a new Call of Duty update and 1 million people play it on all of their different systems, all different parts of the world, different regions, they're all playing in different ways, using different weapons, different tuning setups, different combinations of calling cards and operators, different playlists, all of that sort of stuff. So obviously you're not going to find all the problems that they would find it. That's impossible. So it's a laughably small number to find all of the problems that get found whenever a Call of Duty update goes live. It's also a laughably huge number because it's impractical to get that many people to try and train them up to do QA testing for free, by the sounds of it. I don't know, or like they'd get paid. It's like, it's wrong entirely wrong in both directions. What Call of Duty does is essentially the best that can be done, is they will have QA testers who are trained, highly qualified. They know exactly how to look for bugs, how to report bugs. They will do it, working on it every day. Every day they'll be playing it and they'll get new builds. Probably every day they'll get some kind of new build, some kind of change, and they'll be asked to test specific things, and they know how to give the right feedback. And then they won't be able to find everything, because then they'll go from like however many people, QA testers there are, that they have working on it, playing it all the time. They also have they'll have a load of actual game developers working on it as well. All of those people, then it'll get released to millions of people who will play it, and they'll find new things just because there's more people playing it. It's like, there's literally no way you could ever prepare for that number of people. There's not enough time in the universe for that to happen. So yeah, this is nonsense. Just complete nonsense. Then, fix bugs more often. Passing bug patches off as season updates is possibly the laziest thing I've ever seen a company do. The laziest thing I've ever seen a company do. I mean, obviously that's hyperbole. Obviously that's an exaggeration, but that's an insane exaggeration. Like, the laziest thing I've ever seen a company do. Anyway, passing bug patches off season, obviously insulting to call them lazy. If there's a bug, have it patched within a week. Again, or hire more developers. So, a couple of things there. Obviously, he has no idea how long anything takes. Like, I'm sure there are probably some bugs that get found and get patched very quickly. And normally, Call of Duty is super good like that. If there is a game-breaking bug, if there is something that stops games from running, that makes it so a game is unplayable, like when the zones were all freaky the other day, when something like that happens, generally it is fixed within a day. Like, I can't think of a time when Warzone has been unplayable for more than a few hours. Sometimes at the beginning of events, stuff's gone wrong where the games haven't loaded in properly. Sometimes at the beginning of the season, something weird happens with a new playlist or something like that. And normally those problems get patched within a day. I can't think of any serious ones that were left. But, a lot of the time the way they patch them is taking something out, because that's kind of, they're just reverting some change. They're taking a playlist out. They're taking some feature out. They have the ability to do that. But then actually fixing that stuff takes an insane amount of time. And obviously, because the game's insanely complicated and there's loads of people working on it. And when they say hire more developers, it's like, do they really think? So you've got you've got a bug, you've found out how to reproduce it, you found out what's going on. Do you really think having 10 people working on that bug rather than one person on bug is necessarily going to make it any faster? Having 10 people trying different things on the code isn't going to necessarily make it any quicker. That's like saying, you're making a cup of tea. Like, why is making a cup of tea take you 5 minutes? Have 10 people making that cup of tea. It's not going to necessarily help. It seems a little bit silly. Anyway, quadruple buy stations. It's nearly impossible to purchase back teammates past 4th circle in 50% of matches, especially in Al Mazrah. It would make lobbies healthier and keep players happier. I mean, this is one of those things where it's not the worst idea in the world, there being more buy stations from my perspective, but I've got no idea. Maybe technically they can't have more buy stations. Maybe there's something where if you have more buy stations, that would cause more server problems. Maybe that would cause problems with something else. Maybe even they've tested having more buy stations in the game and people get annoyed with if you're in a game and you're in the final circle but you don't have any money, you can't buy your teammates back, and then you manage to get it down to there's only 3 other teams and they're all solos too. And then one of those teams just happen to have a bunch of money, so they buy their entire team back in the final circle. Maybe a lot of people don't like that. Maybe they found that a lot of people have a bad time when they have that experience of the enemies getting entirely bought back in the last circle. We've done it a bunch of times to people when we've been lucky enough to have a buy station in the last circle, where we've bought everyone back in the last one and gone on to win the game. And it's kind of fun for us, but I bet that's super annoying for everyone else, having a load of enemies just sort of drifting up a million miles up in the sky. So, yeah. I don't think that's helpful. I'm also willing to bet when he says past 4th circle in 50% of matches, I'm willing to bet he just made that number up. I'm willing to bet that's just completely imagined. Then he says remove bots. In general, bots are annoying. Again, to him, some people might like the bots. I quite like having the bots in Warzone 2. I think it makes it interesting. But they also add in 20 to 30 milliseconds of lag when they're introduced to the match. This, again, is something that's stated as fact. Isn't necessarily true. We don't really know what's going on. I know people have done testing where they've said, hey, when the strongholds get activated, suddenly there's an extra bit of lag for some players. Not everybody. Not been tested properly in terms of content creators testing it. But that's, something that some people have seen. Maybe there's something else going on there. Maybe that's something to do with the circle coming in at that point. Maybe that's something to do with something being cleared up at that point. Who knows what's going on? DMZ runs with lots of players in it, but also way more AI than Warzone has. DMZ has insane amounts of AI compared to Warzone. And in my experience, the DMZ servers haven't been that bad. And saying, this isn't DMZ. We don't want them. And that's, I find this very rude. The whole we don't want them. Who's we? You don't want them? Your friends don't want them? I quite like them. Just because you don't want them doesn't mean that other people don't. I like the AI being in the game. I don't play that much Battle Royale now because of all of the loadout changes, really. I think has made the game a bit too much like Warzone 1 for me. But, yeah, it's not because of the AI, personally. But anyway, we don't want them, so why keep them? That seems, to me, that seems very arrogant. I would say, all of this is formatted so nicely that it makes it look more convincing than maybe it is. Stop changing strongholds and black sites. We don't need a new activity to complete these when a new season arrives. We want consistency. Again, I feel the exact opposite to that. I very much, when I heard about them changing the contracts for strongholds, the things that you have to do, so sometimes you have to defuse a bomb, sometimes you have to do a defending thing, stuff like that. I really like that. I think that's cool. It's nice having a little bit more variation. I love there being new stuff with the seasons. I love it when they add new things to do, new things that change up the game. I do not want consistency. I do love them adding new activities. So I don't know who he's talking about when he says we. Adding more bots and a capture flag function makes zero sense and slows down the pace. Like, I don't know. The whole thing when you've got a stronghold, I would say one of the things about a stronghold that I see, again, this is me talking personally, one of the things I see the most, especially when I've played with people like Broken and Lackey, you know, people who are like super aggressive and playing really fast, is that they will see all the strongholds announced, and then if a stronghold's not super close to them, they just don't bother with it because it's like, well, it'll be done by the time we get there. Like that, those players will have finished it by the time we get there, and then they'll have their loadouts, and then like if you go and attack them, then it's basically suicide. If you go and attack after people have finished a stronghold, it's dead. So, you know, sometimes we'll be heading towards a stronghold after they've been announced, and then we'll see the flare going up, showing that they've completed it, and it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll back off, we'll go do something else. There's no point attacking it. By making people do an objective that takes a few seconds longer in there, that gives more teams a chance to go try and fight for that stronghold. It gives you a chance where if you go in and you get the bomb diffuser one, it's like, okay, we can do this quick, awesome. If you go in and you get defend one, it's like, oh, other players are going to have more of a chance to come in and stop us. So it's just like a bit more variation, makes the game a bit more interesting. So I think this is a bad idea. Optimize audio for footsteps. While more controversial in multiplayer, I still don't think it is. I think footstep audio is good, however. But anyway, Warzone players specifically cannot hear footsteps within the open world environment. I couldn't hear them, shouldn't be said when they were 2 feet away sprinting. I do kind of agree with this. I think the footstep audio should be better in Warzone. Again, I think it's probably something that's incredibly complicated. I think it's something they're very aware of. I think they want the audio to be better, but it's probably super hard. So, I don't know. Listen to the community. This is very, very, very rude. While there's plenty more that can be fixed, these issues are the main ones that shouldn't even have to be spoken on. Yet they are. 6 months after release. In-game, weekly surveys for players to choose from a list will answer more questions. So here he's just saying like, hey, you don't know what people want. You don't know what people are asking for. Rather than like, it's not even occurring to him that maybe they know that these things, some of these things are problems, or maybe they disagree with him that some of these things aren't problems. Like I've gone through this and there's only one of these points that I would agree with. Maybe they're looking at these and looking at them being like, okay, we've heard this, but like we disagree with it. We've heard this, but we can't do it. We can't fix it yet. Or maybe we just can't fix it at all. It's impossible. Maybe there's a load of reasons they haven't done it. Like, you have no idea. But implying that they don't listen to the community is just flat out wrong. Especially when he's saying that like, oh, they don't listen to the community. And then in the next tweet, which I'll show you in a second, he's complaining that a lot of the developers quote tweeted it. It's like, how do you think that they knew about it? Is it maybe because they listened to the community? Like, that's how they knew that these things were talked about. And then it says, understand, as in, again, this is very rude, being like, you know, you need to understand. You don't understand. That's the problem. You don't understand. It's like, that's very insulting. We want to help. I don't know who we are here. And this whole want to help thing is kind of what I really wanted to talk about with all this. I know we're going on a bit long, and I am actually going to have to go in a second. But when you say we want to help, it's implying like that it's somehow the community have like some sort of, I don't know what the word is, some like responsibility to make the game better, and the developers need to work with the community to make the game better. And this is a thing that I think lots of people just accept as like a truism, as like something that's obviously true. But to me, that's not true. The community doesn't have any kind of responsibility to make the game better, and the community I don't think, have any kind of role within the creation of the game. Like, I genuinely think that's true. I don't think it's a good thing necessarily for a community to be the ones who have a say in how the game is made. I think there's some games where that works well, and there's some games, you know, Kerbal Space Program and stuff like that, RimWorld, where there's a lot of collaboration between the people who are making the game and the community, and they make things based on what the community wants sometimes. And sometimes that works really well. Sometimes. But I don't think it's just always true. I don't think it's something that you can rely on being consistently true, that the developers should be working with the community to make the game better. Because I think sometimes the developers should be making the game they want to make, and they will find a community that likes it. And if you've got a long-running series like Call of Duty is going for like 20 years, you won't necessarily have the same people liking every single game, and that's fine. Like, people can grow out of Call of Duty, people can get bored of Call of Duty, but I don't think Call of Duty should be constantly trying to chase what the community wants and what the community want, like the community of the last game, what they want. They should be trying to grow and find new people who want to play and find more people who want to play. And, ideally, from a money-making perspective, they should be finding as many people as possible that want to play and reach the biggest community possible, which is why Nintendo is so successful. Because they're really bloody good at that. They don't care about the OG Zelda fans from people who liked Ocarina of Time, or the people who are really into Super Mario Bros. 3. That group doesn't matter anymore. They want to make new games that as many people as possible enjoy, and hopefully that'll include some of the old fans, but who cares if it doesn't? It literally doesn't matter. I find this a very strange idea, this kind of assumption that the developers should be working to please the community that built up around the last game. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's something that you could just assume. And I don't think it's even necessarily a positive thing, because then you end up with really bland, things that aren't very creative, things that don't change very much. And I think that's a shame. It says, but without showing us you care, that's an odd saying, showing us you care. Care about what? We're going to slowly switch to other titles. Fine. If Expel switches to another title, Call of Duty will not care. It's just if individuals switch to other things because they like other games better, that's fine. Maybe they'll win them back in a future game. Who knows? But it doesn't matter as much as people seem to think it does. When they're like, well, I'm not going to play Call of Duty anymore. Okay. But if you're not playing Call of Duty anymore, but then 5 new people are playing Call of Duty, then that's still good. That's still a positive thing. It says, you're losing your hold on the market. No, they're not. I don't know where this evidence is that they're losing their hold on the market. I'd love to see the NPDs that show Call of Duty as not being at the top. Is there anyone that thinks the NPDs for 2022 are going to show Modern Warfare 2? Are the NPDs for 2022 already out? NPDs 2022. NPDs 2022. Best-selling games. I know the NPDs are just US. There we go. So the NPDs for 2022, they're already out. So the best-selling game of last year was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. It beat things like Elden Ring, Madden, NFL, God of War Ragnarok, Pokemon, FIFA. So 3 different Pokemon games. You know what the 12th best-selling game of last year was? Call of Duty Vanguard, which loads of people were like, oh, well, people only bought it at the beginning because of the other Call of Duty games, because it's a Call of Duty game, but word of mouth will kill that game's sales. In 2022, so a few months after Vanguard released, for the next year, it was still the 12th best-selling game. It still sold more than Gran Turismo 7, NBA 2K23. What? That's insane. So it's they're not losing their grip on the industry or anything like that. They're not losing their hold on the market whatsoever. It's insane. I quite like that. Robert Very just said in the chat, Henry Ford said, if I listened to my customers, they would have me build a better horse. Yeah, this is always my thing with Call of Duty in particular, but also, Star Wars, Marvel, everything, is that when people say this is what the community wants, this is what Star Wars fans want, this is what Call of Duty fans want, they always want the same thing that they already had. And it's as someone that likes new experiences and likes new games, I find that unbelievably frustrating. That if we just always had the same thing we always had, we wouldn't have had Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. We wouldn't have had Warzone. We wouldn't have had a lot of the things that people love now wouldn't have ever been created in the first place. It's like when people want remakes, people are like, oh, we want Shipment back, we want Nuketown back. It's how about we want new maps, because then they might be as much fun as those maps that you love from years and years and years ago. That's why I was so excited Vanguard had so many new maps. I loved maps like Eagle's Nest that were different to anything that we'd had before and really exciting. I really liked it. I much prefer having new things. And some of them won't work, some of them won't be great. Like Call of Duty Vanguard Zombies tried something new, didn't work. Champions Hill, for whatever reason, didn't resonate with a lot of people. There's some things that they try and they don't work, and that's fine. That's good, because then sometimes when I try things, they do work. And I'd much rather have a development studio that is trying new stuff and experimenting with stuff rather than just failing. So very quickly, and then there were lots of quote tweets, lots of developers said that replied to it saying this is a bad take. It was really interesting. You had lots of like Call of Duty community people being like, "This is all amazing points. Yeah, why aren't they doing this?" And then loads of people from the industry, not just Call of Duty developers, but loads of people from the industry in general, being like, "This is a terrible take. This doesn't make any sense. This is super insulting. This is very reductive. It shows this person doesn't understand game development at all." And then people are like, "Well, the developers are just being rude." It's like, maybe they're the ones who know what they're talking about. Rather than, it's super easy to come up with a list of things you want to change in a game. It's like when people say that, oh, they'd be a great game developer because they've got loads of great ideas for games. It's like everyone's got great ideas. Like, great ideas are super easy, super cheap. They don't require anything. They don't require any understanding or experience or knowledge or anything. They're the easy part. The hard part is making those things into reality. That's the bit that's valuable. That's the bit that, you have to work on. And so people come up with all these ideas is rubbish. Anyway, he did this tweet afterwards saying, "Dear Call of Duty community, due to the virality of my previous COD tweets, I've learned a ton from developer feedback." Again, going in with the insulting tone of saying, like, feedback. Here's a thread to explain. Call of Duty isn't getting better. I mean, it clearly is. Like, the game is, in lots of ways, getting better. I would say Warzone's been getting worse since people like this kept on trying to demand changes to make it more like Warzone 1. But, DMZ's awesome. Call of Duty in general has been getting better and better. There's been peaks and troughs for me. I loved Advanced Warfare and Infinite Warfare, and I think since then it's got a bit worse. But I loved Blackout and Black Ops 4. I loved Warzone. I loved DMZ. So there's a lot of good things. It says, if your expectations were meaningful changes coming anytime soon, I'd stop holding out hope. Even if we gave them a list of our problems a year ago, it still wouldn't be possible. So he's just like saying, stop trying to want stuff. Stop trying to want changes. Don't say, oh, I hope they do this. Don't. It's just going to get worse. Don't worry, it's just going to get worse. Like, oh. Developers and gamers are disconnected. Unlike the relationship you can build with a streamer, the same can't happen with a developer. They have seemingly no interest, just talking about all developers here apparently, they have no interest in explanation for problems at hand, which can be found via quote tweets on my original thread. Only one of over 100 explained anything without being asked. Additionally, it's not really in their job description. This, I think he's trying to say it in a reasonable sounding way, like it's not really in their job description to explain to you how the game development works. But also, like, there's a million different reasons why they won't explain to you. It's too complicated. You were being super rude in your initial tweet, so they're obviously not going to be like, oh, well, please let me explain it to you. Plus, they're busy people. Like, they don't want to, like, be working all day and then come home and be like, oh, there's another idiot on the internet has started, like, spewing out a load of stuff that's wrong. Please, I'm going to spend a couple of hours trying to type up something to put it in layman's terms to explain to them why all of these things don't happen. Plus, there's loads of times where I've had conversations in DMs with Call of Duty developers, and they've said things like, oh yeah, we're not allowed to talk about that. Like, there's lots of things that are just NDA. They're not allowed to talk about it because they're trade secrets. They're company secrets about how their technology works, how they solved certain problems. Obviously, it's not in their best interest, in the company's best interest, in Activision's best interest, to say, we don't want to do that because we actually think that it's a bad idea, because that makes them sound arrogant. It's not in their interest to say, we can't do that, because that makes them sound incompetent. So it's not in their interest to be like, oh yeah, that's too hard, we can't do it. And it's not in their interest to say it's not worth the money. Even though obviously sometimes it's not worth the money, it makes them sound bad. So it's like they don't have anything to gain by explaining to people. And how many times will they have to do it? They'll have to do it with Expel. Then next week someone else will say something. Like, do they then have to explain it all again? It's just like, there's no reason for them to explain it. It doesn't gain them anything. And it would take a huge amount of time and effort. And sometimes they're not allowed to. Like, by the rules, they're not allowed to. Says, our feedback isn't good enough. Developers need a way to replicate what we're showing them. Without giving them clear instructions as to what's happening, possibly with video evidence, we're going to make it no one know any bugs. He's literally describing QA testing, which already happens. Also, I would say on the Call of Duty Creators Discord, which I assume Expel is a member of, there is a bug bit where we can submit bugs and we can say, hey, this is a bug. And then we give some video with it. They ask us some questions about it. And then, like, the last time that happened was there was a DMZ mission where it said you had to use one dead drop and you could use any. I literally put a thing in the Discord saying, hey, this is a problem. And it was in the patch notes like 2 days later. I'm going to guess they already knew about it. But it does seem like I told them about a bug and they were like, okay, thanks. And then it was fixed in the next patch notes. I think ranting about it on Twitter probably isn't that helpful though. Game bugs have a tier system. Clearly some bugs are more important than others, but the choice as to which bugs are and aren't is entirely up to those producing the game. This can be for a list of different reasons, but it doesn't mean they don't know about an issue that's been there for months. It just doesn't matter as much. Again, very reductive. Or it could be, it's too hard to fix. It's too expensive to fix. They don't know how to fix it. It breaks something else. There could be a million different reasons. Call of Duty is solely a business. This may seem obvious based on different ways they monetize us, but many people believe it's not COD's job to cater to its consumers. We could play a different game, and while that doesn't make COD better for everyone, it's still an option. Yes, obviously, stop. He's presenting it in a negative way, but obviously that's true. Obviously that's true, that you could do that. Armchair developers, coined by those in the industry. No, it's not. I've heard armchair, like armchair managers, armchair experts is like a really common phrase. Like a really common phrase been used for ages. People who don't know anything about something but talk as if they do. This term is used by industry folk to describe the casual player with an opinion on how games should work. We don't know what we're talking about, but we shouldn't be expected to. Be civil and share your feedback with care. Yeah, don't tell other people how to do their jobs. Obviously. Companies run on a set timeline. Even if many of these companies wanted to make changes being asked them, they have timelines in place that physically cannot be changed as it would hurt more than just themselves. Yeah, that's obviously just true. That is true. More developers isn't really an option. While it'd be great to throw more people at a problem, there's a lot more to it than that. People being added are likely uninformed on a process, and too many cooks in the kitchen doesn't help. Again, these things are true. These things aren't presented rudely. They are just true. We don't matter. I don't mean the average player, I mean you and me. If we're on social media, that makes us the outliers. Believe it or not, the vocal minority. Most players have no clue what's wrong with the game and will happily play it without a care in the world. That's really insulting and wrong. Obviously, creators do matter. Obviously, they do a lot for creators. They do the creator calls. They send out packages. They invite creators to events and stuff like that. They do all of these social media things, a lot of which probably don't make them any money, probably cost them a bunch of money. But they do it because they like supporting the community and they like supporting creators. That doesn't mean they're going to do everything you want. They do a lot for creators, a lot more than a lot of other companies do, to be honest. But that doesn't mean they necessarily do everything. And then finally it says, our pleas are being heard. Based on server instability being added to Infinity Ward's Trello board, it's safe to say they see what they're saying, or they just play the game, or they just have a load of data and they know that the servers are unstable. Sure, they may not care, they do care, but we don't know if that's the case or not. Guess we'll have to wait and see, or switch to another game. So, bit of a long rant there, but I just think, like, it's not just about Expel. I think he wrote those tweets badly. I think he wrote them in quite bad faith, and, like, it exposed a lot of things that he obviously doesn't understand, and the weird thing, the thing that I find the oddest of all of this is like that he's acting as if he should understand, as if he has some need to understand and they should educate him and they're not. And I just think that's wrong. Anyway, I need to go now because it's massively overrun and I have to go to the hospital. So thank you so much to everyone who's been watching. I'll be back again tomorrow, 9 a.m, same time, same place, youtube.com/Geeky Pastimes. So make sure you come back and say hi tomorrow morning. We might carry on some of this conversation. And I'll probably be streaming later on twitch.tv/Geeky Pastimes. So see you later and goodbye.